Hello, this is a walkthrough of the Power Platform privilege escalations that I'm finding. It's an escalation of this vulnerability reported in October 2021 that affected the SharePoint HTTP actions. It looks like HTTP actions were also added now to the Office 365 users, Outlook, and other actions as well. And that really has opened the doors to what's possible. So essentially, a malicious insider with an E3, an E5, or other similar license for PowerApps in the Power Platform, they can create a weaponized Power App. And what this app will do is when you send it to the victim, another employee at your company, for example, they'll be met with this permissions prompt, which is very nondescript. It says SharePoint HTTP action for some reason in the users connector, but also for Outlook and other connectors as well. I believe it's maybe a byproduct of the error or the warning messages implemented in this one vulnerability. But in any case, these permissions prompts are not very explicit, and there are other issues that allow, for instance, this user's connector to interact with SharePoint and OneDrive, as well as your Outlook. You can create mail rules, send mail as the person, do things that you wouldn't expect because of a directory traversal, and as well as the scopes on tokens not being limited to what you would expect. So for example, like the Outlook connector can interact with SharePoint and OneDrive. Like I said, the user's connector can send email, just things you wouldn't really think of as a user who receives this app and you click allow. So by combining these three things, you can achieve privilege escalation and control over Outlook, SharePoint, OneDrive, Microsoft Teams, even private one-on-one chats, as well as potentially shared flows between the two of you, and even Azure DevOps or other things depending on the environment. So what I do want to discuss as well is the fact that I have kind of split out each of these connectors and done a little bit of testing, but there's definitely much more to do. Anyway, the Office 365 connectors, the Outlook users groups and groups mail connector all have read-write over the Outlook email and mail rules, which you wouldn't really expect for some of these, like the user or groups connectors. But they can also read and write SharePoint and Team sites, as well as on OneDrive sites as well. And because of all this, obviously we can get sensitive data. We can potentially hijack shared flows, which I might do an example of, but this would get us access to shared flows that potentially have other database connections, and other things like using third-party services, credentials, or even remote code execution if it's running like robotic process automations. So there's a lot of other things that this could imply here, as well as sending emails as the target to phish more targets and creating mail rules to hide. But that's just a couple ideas. So in terms of SharePoint and OneDrive, obviously, again, sensitive data. You might be able to upload link files that might be synced to the desktop, and or even malicious Office documents that lead to remote code execution. The Teams connector, again, can read all chats, including one-on-one private chats. Interesting stuff there. Additionally, the SharePoint connector I've discussed in the previous vulnerability, but it also does allow you to timestamp, modify timestamps. So that's something that this graph up here does not, the graph endpoint that allows you to touch SharePoint and OneDrive. So modifying the modified by field may increase the likelihood of a potential phish and leading to RCE or anything else like that with your malicious docs that you've uploaded. Anyway, the Azure DevOps connector seems to be safe in default tenant settings because it must be enabled to use the delegated API in Azure DevOps. You have to enable it. So that might be safe in default environments, as well as the users groups and Azure AD connectors. So I had ideas of potentially elevating to global admin by changing user, adding yourself to privileged groups, or doing other things like that. It didn't seem to work, but there might be more things to investigate here as well. So yeah, just a couple ideas there. And in terms of remediation, so we can resolve the directory traversal. We can try to reduce the scope of the tokens on the back end and run using the rule of least privilege for each connector, and then improve the warning messages essentially, as well as it's a little bit complicated. If we wanted to potentially consider changing the auth context. So if you, for example, run a Power BI flow, it runs under the context of the user that created the flow. So that might be an option. You put the onus on the person that creates the flow, but it also could lead to like rate limiting and other issues. So so that's something to think about, as well as I do have an idea for adding filtering for the SharePoint HTTP connector, and it might apply to the other ones now, but things have become more complicated with the other HTTP actions becoming moving into the platform. So just a couple ideas, and I'll add a document and describe what I mean by this filtering here as well. But that's the gist of what this video is about. All right, for the demo, the setup is going to look like this. So on the right-hand side here, we have the IT intern, and on the right-hand side here, we have the global admin. And the IT intern has imported a Canvas app, and it's this M365 Phish with directory traversal power app and flows. And they have gone to share and done everyone at the company. And then in workflows, these workflows get imported, turned off. So you'll just need to click them and turn them on, and then you're good to go. So this link for this Power App can be sent to the global admin here, and they will receive this message. So before we actually run the test, I want to just walk through the workflow on the right-hand side here. So actually, I'll maximize it. So the first things that it does is it collects some variables. These aren't really that important. The test connections, so it's going to test the connection context, so just basically checking that the SharePoint HTTP action runs under the context of the global admin. It'll run some tests to show the directory traversals, but that's about it there. The further testing, these are just things that failed for me, just some ideas that I had when I was experimenting around trying to access OneNotes or assign and enumerate roles, or assign myself to privilege groups, things like that. But I just left it in the workflow to provide some, just examples or ideas or other things that are maybe useful. So last scope is the bulk of what the workflow is actually going to be doing, and just ideas for what it could do maliciously. So for example, these first two actions are going to just set a default hard-coded URL and just send that to another victim. So just basically using the person who opens the app as a proxy to send emails to other people and potentially create mail rules to prevent them from seeing any replies back. But yep, this one failed, so that's control over OneNote. So the Outlook sensitive emails, so just an example of a query where we can filter emails for maybe where the body contains the word password or something. So it's just searching for sensitive emails, just things we can do. But these are all out of the, and just to note, these are out of the Outlook connectors, but these easily could be out of the users connector or the groups connector. So just keep that in mind as I walk through these, because at the end of the day, these actions could be flipped out, swapped out for any other actions that provide the same support for the graph URL endpoints. So anyway, this one right here is going to use the SharePoint piece of the graph API, which is under /drive. So instead of /me/messages like this Outlook connector would like us to use, we'll do /drive and then place a file in OneDrive with the contents of MeowMix. And so that's what that does. These two actions, so this groups action and this user action, will both create mail rules. The groups action has to actually directory traverse out of the /groups but the user's connector does not have to do that. And it can actually interact with mail rules. It can send emails, all that good stuff. But moving down, we also have more directory traversals. I did notice that for whatever reason, with this one, when I tried to directory traverse out and get the members of a group, it wouldn't let me until I added this /me/messages at the end, which then allows me to enumerate members of a group. So again, this is not really super useful, but just an interesting technique of maybe on the back end you can see the filtering that's used here of why this traversal with a hashtag at the end works for this specific case, because it may be used against other endpoints too. So, and then getting private teams chats. So we're going to dump chats by directory traversing out of /chats or into /chats. So originally this is just get a team, and to get an idea of what's happening here, right? If we look at the API for for getting a team, it's get /teams/team ID, and so this is the user input here is team ID. So instead of /teams/team ID, we'll do /teams ... chats, right? Or ... chats. So there's that, and then list chats is at the /chats endpoint, so that's why we directory traverse out of 212 to get to the /teams instead, right there. So then it does that. So for each chat, then it goes through and tries to enumerate all the messages in each chat by looking at all of those. So this actually will take a very long time to run if there's a lot of chat messages on the target victim, as for demo purposes. So on my victim, I only have a few chats here. It runs pretty fast, but bear in mind that it might take longer. Okay, so the next thing I want to discuss is the permissions prompt that the victim sees. It's very nondescript and also very confusing. So the Microsoft Teams, for example, you see, oh, show warnings, right? Well, it says proceed with caution. The app contains a flow which uses the SharePoint HTTP action. And for some reason, this warning shows up for the teams, the users, the groups, the Outlook, actually displays it twice, and then the group's mail connector as well, which is a little bit strange because you would expect to only see it for SharePoint. The other interesting thing to note about these permissions prompts is that some of them do say view permissions here, and when you do, for example, view permissions of the user's connector, we only see that it can read your user profile, but it can't modify or delete. But beyond that, it doesn't mention the fact that this connector can also touch any SharePoint site you own, any OneDrive site you have control over. It can touch your emails. It can create mail rules. It can do all of these things that you would not expect this thing to do. And even if you just use the mail as the example, we don't see that it interacts with mail here. But if we look at the view permissions for Outlook, it does say can read, update, and delete your mails. But the interesting thing note for Outlook here is that it doesn't say can interact with your OneDrive or SharePoint. So that is another thing that I think is worth mentioning. All right, and so to jump right into the actual demo, I will now take a look at the left-hand side here where it says Global Admin. And we can see that in their Outlook, there are no mail rules. We go to the chats, and there's a private chat with the IT developer, it.developer@domain, which is not, again, the IT intern, right? But we're going to be able to view it as the IT intern, this private chat that says your new password is ABC123. In the OneDrive of the global admin, there are only 3 files here. And there's a shared flow, which we'll get into in a little bit here. So now we go to this app, and we're going to open it. But before I do click it, I do want to reiterate one more time that we don't need all of these permissions. This looks super suspect. All we need, for example, is just the user's connector, for example. And we have, once they click allow, full control on their OneDrives, their SharePoint sites, their Outlook emails, their We can create mail rules and hijack their shared flows that they've shared with us, and do all these other crazy things that you wouldn't expect to do. And that kind of rings the same for this Office 365 groups. You know, there's different assumptions here, but you have access to all the same data. Same thing with the Outlook connector and the Groups Mail connector here. The SharePoint connector will let you do additional things, but only with SharePoint. For example, modifying the modified by timestamp and all that stuff, which you cannot do with these connectors because the graph endpoints do not support that. And then this Teams connector here is used to access one-on-one chats. That would be required if you wanted to do that, but I will talk about how you might be able to hijack flows to do that for you, and your original payload can maybe only have this. But just wanted to point that out. Now I'm going to click allow, and this workflow will start. And I've already walked through what it does, so I'm just going to let it run, and as I just watch to make sure that it gets through what we need it to get through. Here we go, cool. So it did work, and so now I can come back to Outlook here and look at the mail rules and see, okay, malicious rule HTTP user action, malicious rule HTTP group action. So these two mail rules were created on the right-hand side here when we ran these two actions, and they are out of order because I don't know why. But essentially this groups connector right here, we see that it's the groups connector, is directory traversing out of /groups into /me and creating a mail rule that is called malicious rule HTTP groups action. And so that's right here, groups action. And then if we go to the next one here, this is the users action. Again, we don't need to directory traverse, but it's unusual that it can create mail rules. And so now we create a malicious mail rule using the user connection. And just hit my mic. Both of these can be used to send emails as well. And this is just demonstrating control over Outlook. So that's interesting. And so for the proof of concept here, we just have, just a random mail rule. So beyond that, if we go into the next tab here, we see there's a new file in this global admin's OneDrive to demonstrate control over OneDrive, but also OneDrive is just a SharePoint site. So it also has control over SharePoint sites. But if we go to this action here, demonstrate control over OneDrive, we can see that we use the Outlook connector to directory traverse out of the me messages and touch the drive. And so this is the OneDrive right here, and we create this text file, which I have two T's for text for some reason, with the body content of Meowmix, and this is where it ends up. And I messed up the file extension, but we do see that it does have the contents of Meowmix, and there we go. So we do have control over OneDrive and SharePoint with arbitrary connectors. Again, this is Outlook. It could have been users connector and such. So there's that. And I believe what we can also show here is the trailing hash segment directory traversal. So here we can see that the base request failed. So what I'm trying to do is do a /groups, and then this is a group ID, and get the members of that group. And it's saying the URI path is not supported. Oops. Please use me or users. And so now I directory traverse and try to do /me/messages, and then directory traverse out of that and do /groups. But that also fails. And so what did succeed though is the same thing. I do /me/messages, and then .. directory traverse out to /groups, members, and then this little hashtag at the end, as I think I described before, in order to read the directory data, the directory objects of this user who is in this group, and this is an array of users. An array of users. This is global admin is the only member in this group, but we are getting back group membership here, as well as below in the Teams chats. So again, we do directory traverse out of chats. We can download this and just see the data that it's producing. But the important part is we parse that and then do more requests to pull back the messages from each chat. And then for each message, I'm just posting it here. So we see the word hello, which I go to Teams chats, and must be between the IT intern and such, so we don't care about that. But what we do care about is the fact that if I come back up here, this is the next group of chats, and it says your password is ABC123. And so this is a chat between the IT developer and the global admin, a chat which the IT intern does not have access to in Teams. However, as the IT intern, we can come into this flow run and see that we did have access during the execution of the flow. We could have emailed it or done anything else with all these chats. So that's that. So now I do want to talk about the concept for the shared flows. Now, we could have just in our original payload created a mail rule that says, hey, anytime you receive an email where it says the Outlook, or where it says the somebody has changed your flow, route that directly to trash. We could have done that, but another option is if there is a shared flow where maybe the global administrator or somebody is saying, okay, hey, new IT intern, right? This is how you create a flow, and they just go in and create a demo workflow and say, hey, this is how you get your profile, this is how you get some team data, and then we just share it with that IT intern. Traditionally, now this IT intern can come in here and modify the flow, but if they do that, then this original creator will receive a message, or any other owners will receive a message that says, hey, this person has modified your flow. And so in order to stop that, what we can do is create, I'm just going to pull from my other workflow and save this to my clipboard, but just inject at the very beginning this malicious action here, where we just say, okay, if the subject contains has changed, I believe that's part of the verbiage, we can save it and we can execute it with previous flow runs. And it failed because of the get team, but this action just ran, and this action just ran under the context of this user, so the global admin, because we ran with previous flow runs. So now it says has changed, and presumably whenever the email comes in here that says, hey, so-and-so has changed one of your flows, it will get routed directly to 1253. Oh, perfect timing. Yeah, see? So it went directly to trash and was marked as red. IT intern has changed one of your shared flows. This global admin would have no idea. And what this intern can do now is perpetually just update this flow as much as they want, use this team action to read all of their private messages. If there were database connectors or third-party connectors, we have access to all that stuff. And the idea is you ran with a previous flow run that ran under the credentials of this other person. And so that's just one way of hijacking flows and getting control to even more things depending on the situation, but just an interesting idea, I think. So the one last thing I did want to mention is in the description of this video, there will be a link to another video right here called External. So in our demo, we just kind of showed how a malicious employee could send a Power App to another employee and have all this privilege escalation happen. So this video is going to show just how we can, as an external attacker with a user shell, not even an elevated administrator shell, on a power user's machine, we may be able to hijack Teams, Outlook, or the browser in order to dump credentials and hijack their communications in order to send emails or Teams chats to other people at the company to get them to click on the Power App that we have uploaded from the command line and enabled all the flows from the command line. We share the Power App from the command line, and basically, yeah, just a user shell on a computer, on a power user's computer, can lead to this escalation happening. And then potentially, even as we have them send these infected Power Apps to other employees, we could use those employees to send the Power App to other employees. We just have less control over their communication channels because we haven't directly hijacked, for example, their Skype token out of Teams, or their Outlook client, and such. So just a couple ideas here. Check out the other video to show how we can escalate that even more, and using some basic ideas there. So thank you.